Hello, everyone. My name is Yolanda Johnson, and this is my PowerPoint presentation on the interview that I conducted with my older adult interviewee. Right here, you have three parts of my interview: part one, part two, and part three, which I had to conduct due to the time constraint on Screencast-O-Matic. So they are in 15-minute increments. So, to begin, let's start. The developmental stage, of course, that I chose was the older adult. And this is Erikson's theory on integrity versus despair in this particular stage, which is the wisdom stage. Erikson believed that much of life is preparing for the middle adulthood stage, and that last stage involves much reflection. Older adults As older adults, some can look back with a feeling of integrity, that is, contentment and fulfillment, having led a meaningful life and valuable contribution to society. Others may have a sense of despair during this stage, reflecting upon their experiences and failures. They may fear death as they struggle to find a purpose to their lives, wondering what was the point of life? Was it worth it? My interviewee exhibited some of this theory. In the older adult stage of my interviewee's life, she recalled feelings of past experiences that also allows her to build upon integrity. So she did find a lot of self-empowerment in this stage, and she also gave notion that she became more aware of who she is in this stage, and she built upon previous stages on how she developed ways to handle her own anger. Um, she also had issues in previous stages with overcoming parental connection and the relationship with her mother. She keyed in on this experience a lot during the interview, and I think in this area she finds herself a little bit in despair. She wants to go back and mend that relationship if she could. However, her mother has passed on, so therefore she can't fix those things anymore. So she still carries that with her in this stage. However, some of her accomplishments that she exemplified during the interview was building a family that has values centered around her faith. She illustrated having three daughters and having a marriage that she's no longer in now, but however, that marriage was very rewarding to her, as she explained. And she still has a lot of positive happiness that she carries from those previous experiences in this current older adult stage. And also, as I explained, learning ways to overcome her anger through these experiences. I think now she feels that she is a much patient person, that she has a different outlook on life based on her experiences. So a lot of this stage, from what I can see, is building upon those past experiences. And as Erikson mentioned, it's definitely a reflective part of life. She also have strengths that she has adapted in this stage. And her strengths are geared towards multiple experiences from the various stages, as I mentioned, that influenced her happiness and encouraged her to have emotional growth. One that she still kind of moves on is her previous early adult stage, when she was able to move away from her mother. Although I kind of got the sense that she was moving away from the problem that she was having, and which is why she probably never really had the opportunity to fix that problem or mend that relationship. However, she was able to adapt adapt into a totally new environment from the south to the north, because she mentioned that she moved to Cleveland, Ohio from the south of Georgia, which was a big change, and it was definitely a turning point in her life. But it can be viewed as positive in a sense too. Also, a negative thing that she still experiences is her divorce. She really went back about this. This divorce stage in her life was around her mid-adult stage, 30s to 40s, where she was divorced due to, she explained a lot of his issues in his childhood dealing with poverty. It really had an effect on their marriage, in a future sense, that she still carries through this stage. So she does reflect a lot on things that she wished she could have changed. On a positive note, she still carries spiritual connections. So that is definitely a big factor for her. She has a strong connection with her church environment. She has a strong connection with members of the church that she rely on for support. To move on, I say her psychosocial crisis resolution is definitely the relationship that she could mend, if she could, with her mother. During the interview, I noticed that my interviewee described in detail the relationship that she didn't have, but wanted to have with her mother. This relationship caused her to become isolated from the environment. She also seems to still carry those emotions in this current stage of older adult. Yeah, she definitely, and it's amazing because the lens perspective from an ecological standpoint definitely highlights a lot of the childhood experiences that we have that we may carry in later adulthood life. It has a large effect on the way we view things and the way we interpret our emotions. And I remember in the interview, she got kind of tearful a few times, but she kind of played it off with laughter when she reflected on her mother as well as the divorce that she experienced. To move on, this definitely, the psychosocial crisis resolution was the divorce. As a result of her childhood and past relationship with her mother, the interviewee still feels emotional. So it's kind of hard for someone to move on. Definitely when Erickson highlighted this despair piece of this stage, is definitely in there whether the individual comes to grips with it or not. Also, she explained her ex-husband's childhood. Poverty had a big issue on some of his issues that he carried that I noticed. She said that he believes that all men are supposed to just work. And that was one thing that he watched his father do. So that's what he believed that was appropriate as a man in the household, to just work. And that was an issue for her. And it definitely influenced hardships during their marriage. Therefore, she continued to rely on her faith as a motivating factor to get through those experiences, even though they still ultimately went through a divorce, and that was definitely difficult for her. And I think she explained that it was difficult because it had an effect on one of her youngest children, and that impacted her. So she did a lot of reflecting on that piece as well. To move on, the psychosocial crisis resolution, my interviewee explained that she moved away from her mother's home and relied on her husband as a supportive element to accommodate negative emotions from her childhood. However, her husband's childhood also was a factor that influenced issues in their marriage. So it seems like she wanted to run away from the problem, and in doing so, she just really had to face the problem again. However, it was not a problem of her own. It was a problem that her husband had encountered that she had no control over as a result of his childhood. So that lens, retro perspective, ecology about our environment and how we adapt and how we build our minds subconsciously around the things that we experience as children is definitely true and playing out in my interviewee's life. And therefore, she's definitely reflecting on it in a later adulthood stage. The unfortunate part about it is in this stage, we can't fix those issues. So that's definitely a hard part of servicing or helping a client in the older adult stage, because a lot of times those individuals have passed, or there's a boundary set that we can't go back and fix or mend those relationships. So that definitely is a psychosocial crisis for her at this point. As a result of the experiences in the interviewee's previous stage of life, as I already mentioned, she still carries emotions towards those past relationships. A lot of her interactions contribute to the demeanor that she carries in older adulthood. So now that I have interviewed my older adult, I can kind of see how life definitely evolves. But unfortunately, although life evolves, we tend to keep moving, but some things are definitely worth fixing at that stage. Because what happens if we don't fix those issues at that stage, we carry those negative emotions and those feelings to the next stage, and then the next stage, and then we continue to live on with that issue or that heartbreak, and it has an effect on our future. That's definitely something that I learned about interviewing this older adult. So that ecological standpoint, as I mentioned earlier, definitely has an impact and is definitely a truth to life. And to move on, Sigmund Freud's experience theory is one of the theories. Another theory that I pulled, Freudian theory is that the unconscious mind governs behavior to a greater degree than people suspect. Therefore, the interviewee has not considered how her past or his past emotions still affects her current psychosocial stage of development. So it's easy for me, in a sense, to kind of look at my interviewee and say, oh, okay, this piece was affecting this piece, which is why this piece may feel this way. But however, when we're going through those things, it's definitely subconscious or unconscious. And we don't really understand how things that we may not be interpreting from our past are still affecting us subconsciously. And I think during the interview, she mentioned a couple of times, well, no, that's not why I feel this way. And I don't agree with, once I explained the stages theory, I don't think she agreed with it, or she didn't see my stance in it. Therefore, she hasn't come to grip that those areas of her life are still impacting her, whether she see it consciously or it's an unconscious subliminal thought, but it's still there bothering her. So that's why I use this experience theory from Sigmund Freud. To move on, the theory limitations that I wanted to cover about Erikson's theory is Erikson's theory of life stages carries significant insight. It definitely carries insight and is definitely important. It is also hard to solely base the stages into a categorical norm. People have experiences at different points in life that influences the way they develop in the next stage of life. Human life is extremely complex, and emotions are set based on interactions and experience as a result of those interactions. Based on this interviewee, I noticed that our experiences have a big effect on the way we learn. Our past stages have a big effect on what our next stage of life looks like, whether we know it or not. However, that's why I chose to put this same theory that I use in conjunct with this interview as also a limitation, because there is no norm to these stages. is what I interpreted, because my interviewee had significant experience with her mom that was negative aspects. Although she mentioned that she